Hi. Thank you, Teresa, for the introduction. I want to start by thanking everybody for being here. As it was mentioned, my name is Andrea Canepa. I'm an artist from Peru. I now live in Berlin, in Germany. And I'm going to speak briefly about the show, and then later we can walk around and explain a little more. So there are two points of departure for me for this show. In one hand, as Teresa mentioned, I'm interested in working with textiles. I've been working with textile for some years now, and I'm interested in the quality of the material and also on the conceptual and historical implications of textiles. And in the other hand, the other pillar of the show is my interest also in building these kind of environments that can be explored with the whole body, not just with our visual sense, not just with like our reason, but also with our sense of touch, with our whole body, with our movements, and kind of have an embodied experience of the work. So these are the two columns of the show. So one of the reasons I work with textiles have to do with where I come from. So as I mentioned, I'm Peruvian, and Peru has a very old and rich tradition of textile works. And this predates the arriving of the Europeans, it predates the Inca Empire even. It really is being developed since ancient times in Peru by many different cultures that inhabit that territory for thousands of years. In these ancient societies, textiles were not just didn't just have a utilitarian value, they were also a means of communication. And for example, here what you're seeing are quipus. The quipus are a form, kind of a system of writing, not exactly the same as the writing we know from other ancient societies like the Sumerians or the Egyptians or even the Mayans, because in those kind of writing systems, it was more or less marks on a papiro or like incisions on a clay tablet. Here, what we're doing is, what they were doing was to use cords, to use threads, and to tie knots. So what I found very interesting is that it's a writing system that you don't read it just with your eyes. For sure you need them because the colors are important and they also encode information, but you read it with your hands, with your sense of touch, because you need to feel the knots. So like there is information encoded in the amount of turns each knot have, so you need to feel it with your hands. And I found that very interesting and stimulating. And one of these cultures that I was very much interested in is called paracas. So the paracas are maybe one of the reasons that they are known for is because they were experts. They really were masters in textile work. They did these amazing weavings, and they also were experts in embroidering, and they made these very complex, very detailed works. And some of the, they use some of them, the most complex one in a practice, a ritual practice, a funerary practice called, that what made was a funerary bundle. So when they buried their dead, they cover and put layer on layer on layer of these beautiful textiles that, for example, here you can see just one funerary bundle and some of the layers that were used to cover it. There are more. I just choose some of those layers. And the kind of textiles that they used for it were beautiful and really detailed, and it took like months for each one of those textiles to be made. And they could be really, really big, like sometimes even 80 feet long. And for example, here you can see that there's a depiction of some kind of celebratory ritual where every element, every character is different. This practice has always fascinated me. I have always wondered, like, why did they went through all that process? Why did they put so many layers? Like, what was the meaning of all of this? And in one of my latest visits to Peru, I found about this kind of episode that happened in 1949 that really caught my attention, and I get a little bit obsessed with it. Like these funerary bundles from the Paracas culture were discovered in the beginning of the 20th century, around 1920 or something like that. And they discovered more or less 400 of them. They unburied them, and then they start opening them. But that took a long time, because to open one of these bundles, you have to be really, like, do it carefully, document all the process. It's a very scientific process, so it takes time. So for the 1940s, there were still some bundles that were not opened yet. So the Natural History Museum of New York invited the Archaeological and Anthropological Museum of Lima to come to New York with one of these bundles and open it in the Natural History Museum in New York. And the director of the museum at that time, Rebecca Carrion, that was she was a woman that was very rare for that moment in time, she accepted. So she put the bundle in a crate, and then they put the crate in a boat, and they traveled all the way to New York to open it. But what really kind of shocked me or impressed me in a way is that it was not just something that happened so that some experts could study the bundle and open it and examine it. It was a very public event. They really publicized it very much. Like, they invited journalists, there were cameras filming, there were photographers, journalists, lots of people that filled the museum to capacity. And they opened this bundle in front of everyone. And for me, for my contemporary eyes, this is very violent to the way as I see it today, because now we know that this practice of enveloping the dead, or enveloping the dead body, was a way of transforming the dead, the deceased, into a sacred ancestor. And ancestors were very important in the cosmology of people in ancient Peru. So part of this process had to happen out of view. So to cover the body was a way of keeping it kind of hidden from the view, because the body was going to transform, it was going to decay, and that was something private that not everybody should see. So to open it in front of everyone is kind of destroying the beliefs of these people. And that event kind of got me thinking of what does it mean to cover a body? What does it mean to negate the possibility of identifying, of recognizing, or of knowing what is happening behind that curtain in a way? But it also made me think, what does it mean to open? What does it mean to unveil or reveal and take the cloth off? So that's when I start thinking of the fold, and that's when the title kind of developed. And the title of the exhibition is As We Dwell in the Fold. And I'm gonna show you a video that very low quality, sorry for that, but that will kind of help me exemplify what I would say now. So when you think of fabric, you have like a flat fabric. Imagine the fabric starts moving. So maybe you fold the fabric in this way, and suddenly you create an enclosure, right? You create space and you create some kind of interiority. But if you keep moving the fabric, this interior that you have created opens again and maybe bends very easily. It can bend and create another enclosure in the other side of the fabric. So what was an interior suddenly becomes an exterior, and vice versa, right? So this quality of fabric, this possibility of it for bending and for transforming from being an interior into an exterior, I really like that quality because for me, it's the perfect material to aid or to assist these processes of transformation. You know, these processes where you are transcending one realm and entering into another. So if we go back to the Paracas mummy, so we know now that this practice of enveloping the body was a little bit like building, like for caterpillars when they turn into a butterfly, you know, they build a cocoon and the transformation happens inside that cocoon. So these bodies were like kind of doing that kind of transformation, kind of guarded and protected by all these spirits that were embroidered in those fabrics and that they were like guiding them to the underworld. And it's important also for me to understand the cosmology of ancient Peru. Like the world for these cultures was divided in 2 realms, or even we can say 3 realms. So the world that these bodies were going to enter to is called Ukupacha, that is the underworld. But it's very different from the idea, like the Christian idea of the underworld. So the Ukupacha is a very vibrant place where like these sacred ancestors go to live, but they live among a whole pantheon of gods and a lot of subterranean creatures, and it's a vibrant life. Like they have festivities, they have a social life, and it's an interesting world because it's a world of fertility. It's also a world of darkness, but darkness is not seen as something negative. And because it's a place that is dark, you can't see, you need to touch. It's a world of feeling with your hands. And then in the other part will be the Hanakpacha, or the world above. And of course, this is the celestial world, another pantheon of gods, another like celestial creatures and birds. All of these people inhabit there. Is a world of light. Is a world of like seeing. And these 2 worlds are opposite but complementary. They are always kind of in relation to each other. Same as in the fabric that is kind of like turning and like doing these bends. Like the world is sometimes taken over by the Ukupacha, sometimes is taken over by the Kaipacha, and by the Hanakpacha, and they are trying to connect. And we inhabit this 3rd realm that is called Kaipacha, that will be kind of a membrane between, or a fabric between these 2 worlds. So we, the living, like the humans, the animals, the plants, were a little bit in charge of making these rituals that will make these 2 worlds kind of connect and be in constant equilibrium in this movement of bendings between one side and the other. So this image here is from another culture, Moche culture, also from this moment of ancient times in Peru, and this is the goddess of the underworld. And I'm not going to talk more about that, but I want you to remember this image because when we go to the exhibition, I will bring it up again. Another culture that kind of had a similar practice for sure are the Egyptians. We all know about the Egyptian mummies, and they did more or less the same thing. They enveloped the body with these stripes of linen. That linen was considered a sacred material too, and they have to go again through this transition, through this transformation to enter the world of the dead. And as you can see in the picture, they also went through a very kind of meticulous process of like arranging these straps around the body, doing these patterns, because it has also a ritual importance, and it also was what was making the body become something sacred. And similar as with the Paracas mummy, in the beginning of the 20th century, European explorers. People have been opening tombs in Egypt for a long, long time, but now that Europeans were opening the tombs, they again were like doing it in public. They were like kind of, sometimes they took them to England, for example, and do it in these small theaters where everybody could see. And again, we have this moment of like kind of destroying the beliefs of another culture, even though if from another time that it's not another, they are also kind of the same as us. So. And after seeing all of this, I started thinking of how I have never really questioned the quest we have always to know more and to uncover everything. Like, in a way, I kind of identify how internalized I have it in myself. Like, we always attribute value to learning, to knowing, and sometimes we kind of like don't realize that in that search of knowledge, we are destroying something else. And I was trying to understand why we have these kind of things so internalized. And of course, it comes from the Enlightenment project. These are an ideological agenda behind the Enlightenment project. And even though we think we're past it and we have surpassed it in a way, it's still kind of with us. So a way of exemplifying this or illustrating this is this image that was quite popular in the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, and it's called the Veil of Isis. So it comes from this image that was first mentioned in a classical text that talk about a statue, the statue of the god Isis that was covered by a veil. And in the statue, there was an inscription that says, "I'm all that there is, and I'm all that there will be," something like that. So this image represented the mystery of nature that we will never be able to reach. But when we arrive to this time where like science is exploding and like everyone is so proud of being able to control nature and to, give reason such an important place, they start drawing this statue being unveiled. Because it was like we are finally like uncovering the secrets of nature. We can't control nature now. And I see this image, and it's still, I find it still a little bit violent. Again, we're kind of revealing the body of a woman, and also there's this thing of like understanding nature as something separate from us. It's an object that we can control, that we can like unveil, and thankfully we're not thinking that way anymore. Now we realize that we are part of nature and we're not separated from it. But in any case, this image kind of remind me of another very, very iconic image for Peruvians, that is this one here. This is a woman covered with a shawl, and she's only revealing one eye. And this was a very, very common practice in colonial times in Peru, and it's called tapada limeña. That means like woman covered. And you see this and you might think that it was a religious practice, but it was not. It was not religious at all. These women voluntarily cover their faces because at that moment in time, especially bourgeois women, were not allowed to go out in public. Like, it was not well seen. But if they covered themselves, they just went out. They went out and had like a public life. They went to the market, they went to the theater, they went to political rallies, they spoke with anyone that they want to speak with. So it was kind of a liberating way of living their life in this very constrained moment for women. And there are even chronics of travelers that went to Peru and were like, this is weird. Like, women are kind of have a freedom here that they don't enjoy in other parts of the world. And that got me thinking of like how now is so suspicious to cover your face. Now, if you cover your face, it's like you are hiding something, for sure. And we can even like remember there have been a lot of implications with using a hoodie, for example, and these kind of things. I wonder where this is coming from. Like, it seems like we have the feeling that we need to see someone's face to guess their intention, like if truth resides in a face. And it's not necessarily like that. They could totally be lying to us, no, for sure. But anyway, here you can see like the tapadas in the middle of the square. And there's another reason that is not so well known why the tapadas cover themselves. You know, colonial times were very racist times, and colonial Latin America was different from colonial, the colonies, the English colonies, in very different senses. But one was because the Spaniards came to America with no intention of staying, especially at the beginning. They didn't want to stay. They just wanted to go to America, get rich, and go back to Europe. So they didn't brought their wives. They didn't brought their family. So they just came to America, and they had children with the indigenous women, and then this process called mestizaje, that is the mix of the two cultures, really happened, and it permeate every class in this colonial society. So the elites that were supposed to be the whitest of the white, but not really. There were like a lot of mix of races. So they were supposed to be white, but in reality they weren't. So to kind of like fudge the issue, they cover themselves so that they will kind of, nobody would ever know. And another thing that happened was that this cover kind of like allowed also dissident genders to have a public life, because there are documented cases of men dressed as tapadas that were able to like be in public. And we know about this because sometimes like the shawl fell off, they got discovered and they immediately got arrested and prosecuted. But that made me think of how it's interesting this moment where physical appearance is kind of out of the identity equation in a way. So it's a moment like where it's allowed to not disclose your identity. And we live right now in a moment when our physical appearance, our race, our gender is such an important part of our sense of self and of the way we perceive others, that I found that moment, that period, kind of interesting. And well, so until now I've been talking about covering yourself, this movement towards the inside, towards like enclosing yourself, but I also want to talk about the opposite movement of like uncovering. And one thing that I found, one example that I found that I really like, because it relates to the Paracas example in a way, but also in an opposite way, is the Sufi whirling. And this is a Muslim, Sufi Muslim practice that is a form of meditating and enter into this trance that help you transcend in a mystical way. And the clothes that they are using, it's also related to funerary practices. Like, for example, the hat is supposed to represent the tombstone. When they enter the arena to kind of start the practice, they are covered with this black cape that is supposed to represent the coffin. And the white skirt is, I don't know how to pronounce this word in English, shroud? Like that, yeah, exactly. So it's supposed to be that, and it's made of the same fabric that Sufi Muslims used to get buried with. So when they start turning, the skirt rises, and that represents the death of ego. And that kind of helped them enter into this kind of trance state that connects them to this mystical realm. So there's, again, we're transitioning from the normal life, the everyday life, to this kind of moment of transcendence and of mystical meditation. And fabric is part of it. Fabric is something that is kind of aiding in this practice. And going again to this idea of fabric as an aid, Linus Blanket came to mind because, as we know, Linus Blanket of the comic Peanuts, it's called a transitional object. So that was coined by a psychoanalyst, the guy that does psychoanalysis, in the 50s. And to explain his concept, he actually used Linus Blanket, because what transitional objects are like an aid for the very, very young child that is kind of understanding that she or he is being separated from their mom, from the world. He's alone, he's thrown to a world, and that creates anxiety. So the transitional object helps to deal with that anxiety. And the common characteristic of the transitional objects is that they have to be soft, they have to be warm, they have to have texture, and they have to be movable. It has to be something that can be animated in a way, so the child kind of project everything into this thing that moves. It not necessarily has to be fabric, it can be a teddy bear or something like that, but it's very common for it to be fabric. So again, we have this fabric as a medium of helping in a transition. And now I want to talk about 2 more examples, and then I finish. I wanted to talk about Louis Fuller, that is this American dancer. In the end of the 19th century, went to Paris, and she's invented this dance called serpentine dance, where she used this huge dress of draped fabric with sticks on the edges that she moved with her arms, and she started creating these amazing kind of abstract figures, and it was a sensation. Like, everybody liked it, and it was also a very kind of important moment for art, because it was also a moment of change. Like, before this, in the world of dance, they only had ballet, and ballet was very kind of representing life, like mimicking life. There was a story, there were costumes, and here comes this lady that is doing these abstract movements, and she really was setting the basis for contemporary dance. Actually, she was friends with Isidora Duncan, that is considered the grandmother of modern dance, and she kind of took a lot from Louis Fuller. And yeah, I found that interesting, because it's this fabric that is coming out from her body to create these beautiful forms in this display. And it's in a way, she, for the first time, instead of showing you the flower, she was kind of showing you the action of blooming. Instead of showing you the bird, she was showing the action of flying, and that was very new at the time. I was thinking I started with these fabrics that cover the body to protect it, to keep it out of the gaze of others, and in that way protect the body, the integrity of that body. And I was thinking how the opposite movement can also protect a body. So then the parachute came to mind, and I started looking into the history of the parachute, and I found this incredible story of this woman. This is Kate Paulus. She is a German woman that also at the end of the 19th century was one of the first women doing jumps with a parachute. And at that moment, it was crowds go to see these exhibition jumps, and people jump from balloons, and it was a thing. And she was jumping with her partner. They were making these exhibition jumps together. And one day, his parachute got tangled with the ropes, with the strings, and it didn't deploy, and she saw him die. She saw him fell and died. So she was devastated and started working on the design of a folding parachute, so that when you fold it, there was no way that the strings could get tangled. And that's the beginning, that's the starting point of the folding parachute that it's still in use today. So this huge fabric turns into this little compact thing, and it saves a lot of lives. And this invention kind of like went massive, and then for the Second World War, it was used everywhere in the world, and while the soldiers were in battle, it was, of course, women that was folding these huge parachutes in these huge spaces with these very big tables in a kind of fabric-like places. And every time I see these pictures, I find them beautiful, and I can't stop imagining how beautiful it must have been, these women moving along these tables, like folding and unfolding these huge pieces of fabric. And I also feel like that might have looked like a choreography, a very beautiful choreography in a way, but also a choreography very important, because if you make a mistake, somebody dies. So these are some examples of the movement towards the outside, when we're kind of trying to reach limits that are outside of ourselves, and helping us to reach those limits through the fabric, through the displaying of the unfolding of the fabric. And I want to finish with this image. We're going back to Peru again, and this is the symbols for something called tinku. Tinku is a Quechua word that comes from this language that is spoken in the Andes in Peru. And tinku means encounter. And it can even be turned into a verb. When, like, for example, when the two rivers converge, they are said to tinkui. Or when a seed sprouts and like separates into leaves, they are also supposed to be tinkuing or something like that. And the way to represent it in iconography is through these step pyramids, as you can see. This pyramid here represents the Ukupacha, the underworld. And these on top, the inverted ones, here and here, are the Hanakpacha. So they are trying to reach each other. And then you have these tiny versions here that have the spiral. They're trying to reach the other, because these worlds are always trying to connect. And here there's another version of it, like this is the world from below, trying to reach the world from above. And I'm finishing with this, because for me this also is kind of the image of a fold. So that has been the thread through all the show. And finally, what my intention was to feel all of these things, these movements towards the inside and toward the outside, with the fabrics in the exhibition. That's why everybody can take them out and try them and like play with them and feel the weight, feel the enclosure, feel the movement of opening. And yeah, so that is it. I also kind of wrote all of this in an extended version in a little publication that you can take with you. There's more detailed and maybe a little more of reflection in that publication. So now we can, maybe if you have any questions, I can answer them now, and if not, we can go and like quickly see the exhibition together.
Thank you.